Let's dive right into a case that is just fascinating. It sits at this really tricky intersection of national law, international human rights, and, well, the ultimate punishment. It's a story that's going to force us to ask some pretty tough questions about what justice really is.
And this is the cold, hard fact at the center of it all. On the very last day of March in 2001, Mariette Bosch, a South African national, was executed by hanging for the crime of murder. And while that was the end of her life, it was really just the beginning of the story for the legal world.
And here's the twist that makes this whole thing so mind-bending. Over 2.5 years after she was executed, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the very body designed to protect these rights, came out with its final decision. And what they found was that Botswana had not violated her fundamental rights.
Right? That's the question. How on earth is that possible? How can a woman be executed while her case is still technically pending, only for that same body to later say, nope, everything was done by the book? To get it, we really have to walk through the legal arguments one by one.
So, first things first, let's just lay out the timeline. The timing of events here is absolutely critical to understanding how this all played out.
So look at this. She's convicted in '99. Her last appeal inside Botswana fails in January 2001. A month later, her team takes the case to the African Commission. But just a few weeks after that, and this is the key part, long before the Commission could ever make a ruling, she was executed. The Commission's final decision? That didn't come for another 2.5 years.
Okay, so with the case now in front of the African Commission, her representatives laid out 3 very specific arguments. They claimed Botswana had violated its own commitments under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Let's break down exactly what they were arguing.
So these were the 3 pillars of their case. First, her trial was just fundamentally unfair because the judge got a basic principle of law completely backward. Second, that even if she was guilty, the death sentence was way too harsh for her specific situation. And third, that executing her while the commission was looking at her case was in and of itself an unlawful act.
Now, that first allegation, it's maybe the most serious. It hits at the absolute core of the legal system. You know, you're presumed innocent until proven guilty. The government has to prove you did it. But the claim here was that the trial judge completely flipped that and basically told Mrs. Bosch that she had to prove she didn't do it. I mean, that would be a huge, huge error.
So, with these really serious claims on the table, what did the Commission do? How did they respond? This is where we get into the nitty-gritty of legal interpretation, and it shows why this case took the turn that it did.
You know, this is the question the Commission really had to wrestle with. If a judge makes a mistake, even a really big one, does that automatically mean the whole trial is thrown out? The conviction is invalid? And the Commission's answer was, well, not necessarily.
And this quote right here, this is the legal standard they were using. The key thing for them wasn't just if an error happened. The real question was, did that error lead to a failure of justice? A technical mistake isn't enough. It has to be something that fundamentally corrupts the entire verdict.
So here's how they applied that idea. The commission pointed out that Botswana's own court of appeal had spotted the trial judge's mistake, and what that higher court did was go back and re-examine every piece of evidence themselves. They concluded that the evidence against her was so overwhelming that the conviction was still safe despite the judge's error. So the commission basically deferred to them, saying the mistake was in effect corrected by their own system.
Okay, on to the second argument, that the death sentence was disproportionate. This whole idea hinged on something called extenuating circumstances. Now, the key here is that this isn't just about any personal problem you might have. It's about facts that reduce your moral blameworthiness, not your legal guilt. It's about things that make your actions, while still illegal, somehow less morally terrible.
So, the Commission looked at the 3-part test that the Botswana courts used. It's actually a pretty logical checklist. First, were there even any facts that could have affected her state of mind? Second, did those facts actually affect her? And third, even if they did, was it enough to make her less morally guilty? It's a pretty high bar to clear.
And here's the conclusion the Botswana courts came to, which the Commission agreed with. They looked at the evidence and they said, you know what? This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a snap decision. They found evidence of considerable effort and careful planning. And to them, that just completely contradicted the idea of extenuating circumstances. So the death penalty was deemed appropriate under their law.
So that brings us to the final, and let's be honest, the most shocking issue here. How could Botswana execute Mrs. Bosch
after the African Commission had specifically asked them to wait. I mean, on the surface, that looks like a total defiance of an international human rights body.
And the ruling on this, you're not going to believe it, it came down to a simple, almost absurd procedural issue. The commission sent its request to stop the execution by fax, but Botswana's government said the president's office never got it. And in the end, the commission had to conclude that they had no proof of receipt. No proof the fax was ever received meant they couldn't prove Botswana had knowingly ignored them.
So after going through each of these three arguments very, very carefully, the commission finally came to its final and, for a lot of people, a really shocking decision.
Based on a very strict reading of the law and the evidence they had, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights found that the Republic of Botswana was not in violation of the African Charter. Legally speaking, the trial, the sentence, and the execution were all upheld.
But, and this is a really big but, they didn't just leave it there. Right after finding no violation, the commission added this plea. They strongly urged Botswana to think about putting a pause on the death penalty altogether. It was a crystal clear signal. Okay, you may have followed the letter of the law, but we are deeply, deeply uncomfortable with where that led.
And that's what we're left with, isn't it? The case of Mariette Bosch is just the stark reminder that a correct legal process and a just moral outcome aren't always the same thing. The commission followed the rules meticulously and found no violation, but in the very same breath they called for an end to the practice that took her life. And it just forces us to ask, what's the point of a justice system if it can follow every single rule and still leave us with a result that feels so profoundly wrong?